Hey folks, before we get into today's podcast episode, I just wanted to give you guys an update that from this episode moving forward, there's not going to be any audio spectrums in the YouTube videos anymore. Mostly because it hasn't been efficient for me to do that. Like to render that footage has taken me like 8 hours each episode. So I've just decided to cut it. Hopefully you guys still enjoy the podcast, even though those are cut, but the content you're going to be hearing today is still, I think, a lot of fun, especially for any DMs out there who have questions about how to DM. So moving on to the episode, and hope you all enjoy it. Thanks. Hi there, my name is Teni Brant, and welcome to Speak Dicely, the podcast where I get together with other tabletop enthusiasts and we speak dicely together. Normally on this podcast, I bring in guests and I'll ask them questions about their experiences with tabletop role-playing games. Today is going to be a bit different, in that one of my guests is preparing to be a dungeon master for the first time. So we're going to be answering their questions to help them prepare to run their own game. So joining me today are Jonnathan Leong-Sem, Jason Thomson, and my Dungeon Master Reinforcements, Logan Cracknell. Hey, guys.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good. Happy to have everybody here. I got to say, just leading off the top, Jonnathan, I'm so glad you messaged me about starting your own game, because we haven't spoken in quite some time.
Yeah, quite some time. I'm a little ashamed to admit how much time, but yeah, like a few years, I would say. Is that fair?
Oh, I wouldn't feel too bad, because it takes two to tango, right?
Yeah, it's just the beauty of Dungeons and Dragons bringing people together across the province.
Yeah, in the times where we're now getting more familiar with video calls and socializing over great distances, I think these kind of connections are going to be more common.
For sure.
So I really like this group of people we got here today, because the four of us are a bunch of technicians who went to university together, and this just brings back so many memories.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for having me too. It feels, like, Jason, I don't know how long you've been playing for, but Logan, I know you've been playing for a long time. I actually listened to the podcast episode that you were on, and I got your full story. So that was really cool. I didn't know that about you. I knew you played in university, but I didn't know that it started. Is it at Comics Connection that it started?
Yeah. No. Conspiracy Comics.
Okay.
Different Westdale comic book shop. Does Comic Connection still exist?
No, I think it's closed. But I digress.
My childhood is dead.
It's funny you mentioned that, Jonnathan. So my very first experience was an unfortunate game of Pathfinder where my friends didn't trust each other and used the mechanics of the game to kick the crap out of each other as level 1 characters.
Oh, that must have been really exciting.
Oh, yeah. And I was just like, what do you even do with this? So I actually didn't get a real taste of Dungeons and Dragons until playing with basically everyone here. Denny was my first DM for 5th edition. And so it's fun to be able to talk with everyone here, with so many people I love, and the people I've really kind of dived into tabletop games with.
Yeah, this is great. I feel like the outlier. Anyway, we'll get into it. But thank you for having me, essentially. But yeah, I'm excited to see you all and be here with you.
It's a pleasure. And my connection with Jonnathan, as I mentioned, we all kind of trained as technicians together. And when I was learning audio engineering and getting myself more familiar with that kind of work, I worked with Jonnathan as his assistant when he was doing sound design. So that was very informative and very inspirational to where I've ended up now.
Yeah, it was a great time. I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, those are good times.
You keep saying we're all technicians. I just want to keep wanting to be like, actually, I'm a designer, but no, I do technician work too, and I'm not designing anything at the moment.
We're all technically designers, but I think of this crew as a bunch of technicians.
Yeah, certainly tech buddies, to be sure.
So we've got a little bit of a time crunch today, but I guess it's a soft one. So I probably shouldn't delay us too much, but I'm so happy to get catching up with you guys. And so Jonnathan, you are preparing to be a DM in the coming year, and I guess you've got questions about how to go about that.
Yeah, so it's I'll start with a bit of the background. I started like playing Dungeons and Dragons was a 2020 resolution for me. I wanted to get into Dungeons and Dragons in 2020. That was a thing, and little did I know I'd have a lot of time to do so. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was in January or February. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, I know you've talked about it before, but do you want to join a campaign that I'm starting?" And that it got me into the game, and then we had one session and then lockdown, and then we just couldn't get the ball rolling online. We did one Roll20 session, I think, and then it was just dead in the water. And then a few months later, I don't even know when it was, I feel like it was around May, I started playing in another campaign that my partner's brother started, and it was like mostly newbies except for one other person. And then I got into it, but I didn't have time to build a character. So I'm playing with like a pre-built sort of character that I sort of filled in the backstory and details of. I'm very new to Dungeons and Dragons. So like when I saw your channel pop up, I was like, I gotta get in touch, because like I know Denny's not gonna judge me. He's gonna be there for me because he's a pal. He's a great guy. So I jumped on it and I was like, I need help because I want to run my own campaign now, but I'm completely just I'm not there. I'm not there yet. I need to get there because I want to do it. So that's the backstory.
And I thought it was funny that you got in contact with me, and my immediate response was, we should have this conversation on a podcast episode.
I won't judge you, but the entirety of the internet might.
That's fine. I can handle the internet. I'm not on the internet a lot, so except to look up how to play Dungeons and Dragons.
That's fair. But my reasoning to propose that was, what better way to help anybody else with similar questions than somebody who's actually in the situation, and we could share that with them.
I agree.
And Jason, we've kind of put you a little on the back burner. I suppose we should get a little bit about you too. You're here.
I am here. It is exciting. I mean, certainly, as far as my role-playing experience goes, a lot of what I come to Dungeons & Dragons for ultimately is to tell the story, and I tend to do that in ways that I find as humorous as possible. I would argue that my creative side is not necessarily in building the world, but breaking other people's worlds in ways that I find hilarious. And so I come to Dungeons & Dragons to play characters like Tuk Tuk the Explorer, who is a parody of Dora the Explorer, who is secretly insane. Or I play a centaur monk who has come to save the land and heal everyone. And his hubris gets him into situations that are incredibly dangerous, as well. His bulky size makes it difficult for the party to travel with him. So things like that, where I look at the game and go, how can we have fun with this? And those are the stories that I tend to develop. And I've mentioned this to you before, Denny, but I tend to say, like, if a DM invites me to a game, they know exactly what they're getting into.
He is a force of chaos. All right. Well, I'm glad to have you both, and thank you again, Logan, for coming in. But we've got a certain amount of time, and I believe Jonnathan needs some help.
Yes, please. I didn't mean to sound so desperate, but so I guess, like, Jason, I like what you said about wanting to, like, you aim to tell a story, make it as enjoyable as possible. I think that's like, in my mind, that I know I've only played one game, but that's what makes a good DM, is like, you want to be, as you also said it, Denny, on the podcast, like, you want to make it fun for the players. Like, that's your, like, if you're in it for you, it's probably not going to work out well. And so, yeah, I feel like sorry, I should preface, I spent a whole evening, like, I thought it was like an hour and a half. I think it ended up being 4 hours, writing a whole outline. So I actually got a good chunk of story done.
Oh, great.
But I guess like I know you've answered this, but like how much preparation is over preparation? Like how over prepared can you be really? Like, and like when you were starting out, like when were you like, yeah, I'm still underprepared? And then that's the point where you were like, where looking back, you were like, no, that was probably too much.
Probably when I planned to spend an hour writing stuff and wrote 4 hours. I don't know exactly how much you've written.
That's awesome.
But get ready for players like Jason to just break all of that. I think the way that I like to approach my prep, especially, so I will create, and I love world building. So I don't think everyone needs to do this, but I will spend the time making all these small things so my players can ask the question of like, oh, there's a town on this map. What on earth goes on there? And I can be like, oh, that's a town that's mostly populated by halflings, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't really matter. Like, I do that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that over prepping is fine. Like, things that I as a DM enjoy prepping is great. And I'll over prep that stuff because that's a me thing.
Right.
But I think anything that it's like, it gets to those things, the over prepping I find is like where it's like, I don't really enjoy the prepping of this thing. It's something that needs to happen for the game. But I'm going to prep so many of them and so far into the future that it doesn't necessarily, my prep isn't taking into consideration what the players might do. So it's like, oh, I've prepped, let's say, quest A, B, C, and D, and it's, it's Final Fantasy 1. It's get the 4 MacGuffins, save a princess, beat the big god of chaos. And it's like, what if my players decide that they don't want to save the princess or they want to go somewhere else? And it's like, oh, all that other stuff doesn't matter. So I think in terms of not wanting to over prep, I'd focus on just like, get some small things that the players can do. I like the start small approach. Start with that town they'll be in, and feel free to improvise. Like improv is like 90% of my prep.
Yeah, like how many sessions do you do where like you get through 100% of the content that you've prepped? And
I realize I'm doing a visual, but for people who do not see me, it's a big ass 0.
That is the sound of 0.
Yeah, that is it was like 2 sessions ago, Denny, in the session, he's like, I think we skipped the quest Logan wanted us to go on this session. And at the end, he asked me, I was like, oh yeah, you guys found a way, just completely avoided the thing.
And so when you go for the improv, then do you pull out of your back pocket of things that were just completely disregarded and then you just adapt from there? Or do you come up with stuff right on the spot?
So I think
bit of both.
Yeah, I think it could be a bit of both. When it comes to over preparing, even if you do over prepare, there's a bit of a saving grace in that if your players end up ignoring something that you expected them to do, that essentially no longer exists in their minds because they don't know if it's happening. If it's a quest, for example, you can now pick up that thing and drop it off somewhere in the future because you've prepared it. You can just recycle it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like Kurt Cobain and his lyrics.
Exactly. And in fact, to go even farther on that metaphor, like, they say good artists copy, great artists steal, right? Like, as far as I'm concerned, even in character creation, none of my ideas are original. I just look at something and go, that's funny, and I want to see what happens if I do that.
Jason, You're saying Dora the Explorer wasn't your original idea?
But what I mean is that like there are resources, like even like rolling tables for names, rolling tables for towns. Like it is not cheating to use those resources. Like if you're looking at just having things in front of you to use as resources, there are actually tools you can use to look as if you're improvising when in reality you're pulling from these other strings of packages that people have made to help you. And that is actually part of improvising, using what's already been created, right? Yeah, and certainly there's so many resources even in your own world if you just look at other campaign books too. I've certainly been inspired by the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica in particular for a lot of the things I've done.
Sorry, go ahead, Logan.
I was gonna say, I think stealing is a lot of my prep too, and like fully, things like maps. Like if I don't want to make a map, someone's probably made a similar enough map. Someone's probably made a port. Like I want, it's a port town. Today I don't feel like making a port town that they're going to. Google D&D port town map, and it's like, oh, there's one. My players will have no idea. If they do, and they're like, oh, I've seen this map on like the DM's Guild or something, I'm like, whatever. Like in the game, they're not going. No one's going to care.
It's just like everything you wanted to do in school. Just take someone else's work.
Yeah, and professors won't be asking you to like MLA source that shit.
That's beautiful.
No one's checking your D&D bibliography.
That's amazing. Okay, that's great. That's good to know, because like I started world building. I didn't start like building the campaign necessarily, but I did, like, I would say the first few 100,000 years of history that is written in this world. And so, like, I guess something that I've learned is like what makes a great story is getting into the story late. Like a lot of stuff has already happened. You're now seeing the start of conflict rather than a bunch of backstory. So like, would you guys say that that's something that you find makes a good campaign? Like, do you guys like to start with like origin stories and like, or like sort of beginnings, I guess?
So I think both are viable approaches. I'm assuming when you mean like origin stories, you mean of like the characters themselves, or do you mean like the origin of the universe of your world or something like that?
Yeah, I guess either or. Like what do you guys like to see at the beginning of a campaign, I guess is the question.
Right. So when it comes to the very first session, there something that I think works very much a lot of the time is try to get action to happen quickly. Because that'll immediately engage the players, especially if you throw it like into a fight or something weird like a carnival, somebody drags you into a contest, like immediately making the players do things will get them immediately invested, and rolling dice will make it fun. When it comes to like this early world building, I think that's a trap a lot of DMs fall into, is this like writing the thousands years prehistory. Some DMs I've played with, they've done this sort of thing, and they're like, oh, this is what happened there. And I love that as a player, but I know a lot of players won't ask about that because they're interested in the story that they're playing now. I think that writing that history is something that can kind of happen as you play the game, and you could be like, okay, the players find this. And then you start working backwards and going, why is that there? This happened in the past. Ooh, that sounds interesting. Like there was this fight between the gods and the giants, and that's why there's this giant skull in the middle of this field. And building history based off of coincidences or just random things you put into your world is the way I kind of build history. And like Logan was saying, starting small and then building out. Like if I've got a town that the players are starting in, I'll focus on that town, maybe put a few NPCs in there, maybe a few points of interest within the town, a person to give them a quest. And then if I'm going to put surrounding towns or surrounding interesting locations, I'll write a single sentence about that location because I don't know if they're going to go there. So I kind of want an idea of what it is, but I don't want to invest my time incorrectly. Like in the Critical Role campaign, there's a town called Hupperduke. I would describe that in one sentence as a town filled with gnomes who are very tinker heavy and build machinery. And so I know what that town's about, but I'm not going to flesh it out further until I know they're going to make their way there.
All right.
Yeah, I would definitely for myself say, yeah, I don't make a lot of prehistory unless it's something relevant to the campaign that I just need to know a bit about. But even that, I'm thinking of the last, like the one that I ran that completed before the one Denny and I are currently in. That one, as it went on, history started coming up. But when it started, I didn't know any of that stuff. I developed it as I realized where the story was going and how to. I started to need to, for myself, figure out how things got to where they were and like what made sense. And for characters, I think I find, and it's something that I think maybe stems from having like played very young and like earlier editions where it was more of a tradition. That think you saw was I really do like the idea that your adventurers aren't adventurers until that first session. You don't want your person. I think I've said this in one of the other ones, the other podcasts, is you don't want your hero unless you're coming in at like a level 10 or something campaign. You're starting out level 1, 2, even 3. They shouldn't have a grand adventure already. They shouldn't have slayed a dragon, saved a kingdom. Maybe they, for the one that I'm running right now, Matt's character, his big thing he did before this was he fought a threat to the town. A threat to the town was a bear. A polar bear got down from the mountains. He hurt himself or something, but he helped fight it off. And I was like, oh, cool. That's why you're a fighter. That makes sense why that's there. But you're not, it's not making the players like, oh, I was a fighter in the Royal Guard and I won all these tournaments and I was a royal knight. And it's like, but you're level 1 or you're level 2. It's like, how on earth did you do all these things?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think to that point too, like players make it canon. Making it canon is something I sometimes jokingly will say, like, it's canon now. This concept that like because the players are talking about something and got invested in something that a DM improved, it now matters in history. Because I think there is something to note that the history doesn't necessarily matter until the DM or the players make it matter. And I think that there's a special skill you can forge as a DM in understanding where the line is between like, oh, I'm going to take this and make it matter, and I'm going to take this and not really bother. Now, the one thing I will say, and I'll let everyone comment on this as well, because of the base rules of Dungeons and Dragons, I find a lot of people will talk about pantheons. Like the one thing that people will clarify is these are the gods. And that's like the for sure piece of backwork that at least one portion of it is that will always be prepped because there's a commitment in character creation to people making a commitment to a god. But really, other than that, the world's your oyster, or at least I feel like.
Yeah, pantheons. I never commit to like a pantheon the way that like, oh, all the gods in this realm are the Forgotten Realm gods, or this, this campaign is, unless it's something really important to it. I'm not like, okay, everyone, you can only choose Norse gods, and it ended up in a friend of ours became a cleric of Talos because they thought that was the only Tempest cleric god when they looked through the player's handbook really quickly. I had no idea who Talos was until he said that. He's like, I'm going to be a cleric of Talos. I was like, who is this god? Cool, they're an evil god of destruction and storms. But going back to something Jason said of that, like the players make things canon, I also think a really useful tool for a DM is have the players, give them agency to create things in the world. If your player is a wizard from, he studies at the college, let's say there's like a wizard college or something. When something comes up about that, and it's not something that you really need like a hard, important thing about, ask the player. They could be the expert on that thing. What was life like in the college? And they're like, oh, it was miserable. They're actually, everyone's a fake wizard there. They're just stealing your money. And it's like, cool. Now that makes something interesting that the players got to engage with that, maybe as a DM, I wasn't really, it existed because someone said that they wanted to be from a college of wizards, but I wasn't planning anything for it. So I didn't have to prep that. They got some agency in the world. And I think that is like a very useful tool.
Yeah, it kind of takes the load off.
Yeah, I think attaching to that point, in the players are the experts of their world. Like if you ask them their backstory, and depending on how much they want to go into it, they'll be able to give you the answers that are important to them. like Logan was saying about this Wizard's Tower, that they've basically done your DM work within what's important for their character. And then collaborating with that character, like, and figuring out like what is it they want, what's important to them, and like figuring out those answers about the characters that you're going to be playing with also gives you ways to kind of steer the campaign as well. And Jason's a great example of this from the last great campaign I ran, because the two of us were roommates. So basically after every session, he had these like brilliant ideas about what he wanted with his character and about his past. And I was like, this is all great. This is doing my job for me, basically, on anything that involves you. So perfect, less writing for me. But also I knew what his want was. And because it was so simple, it was like I could steer the party like a horse with a carrot. Like Jason's like, I'm searching for boots. And his character was so eccentric that the rest of the party was like, okay, well, we have to go with him because he might just hurt himself or somebody else.
Right. Yeah, that's and so if you weren't roommates, how much would you be doing this with other players?
I mean, as much as any other player wanted to talk to me, I would love to talk with them.
Okay. But you kind of leave that decision up to them. It's kind of an unspoken thing. Like, hey, if you guys want to talk, like, I'm here.
I think make it a spoken thing.
Yeah. I will, of course, get in touch with them if I have an idea that I think is really cool, but I just want to get their permission because I don't want to encroach on their story.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is I have a player in the game that I run, my friend Michael, who often messages me after sessions being like, here's my theory of where things are going. He's always says, don't tell me anything.
Mm-hmm.
And he's definitely influenced things because of these theories that he doesn't know he has. But also, I say Michael, it's the Michael we all know. Talk about these people like Jonnathan doesn't know who they are. It's the Michael we went to school with, who's probably going to watch this and now realize that, oh, he influences the world by doing these. But I love when he messages me.
He's going to love that.
Yeah, he's going to. I love when he messages me being like, ooh, is this the thing? Is this how it's going to work out? Don't tell me. Or he's like, this is what my character's thinking of doing. What are your thoughts? Blah, blah, blah. And I think feel free to just like at the first session be like, hey, anything you want to ask, like related to the game, just message me. Any thoughts, whatnot, things about your characters. And open that door for players, especially since this is your first time DMing. I'm assuming the players might also be fairly new.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my next questions. Is the people I'm planning for are all beginners, so it'll be their first time playing, and I just want to know from experience, like, do you find it easier or harder to DM for newbies versus experienced players?
Both.
What?
And why?
So I think both is my answer to that. They're both hard and they're both easy for different reasons. And experienced players have so much knowledge. They know their characters. The rules things, I think, become a lot easier the more familiar everyone is. Experienced players also have preconceived notions of what D&D is coming in. That, I think people try to break and stuff, but it's always there. Like, there are things you expect. There's things you're bringing in from what you've done before. And the few times I've run, especially sessions for people who everyone didn't know what they were doing, I focused on just what are the basic rules you need to know as a player. Everything else, just like, think of what you possibly want to do. You can ask questions, like, be very open. I was like, if you're not sure of what to do, also feel free to kind of like, if you're totally lost, ask a question for guidance. Like, I'm not here to be like, you have to come up with every idea. But all of those new players having no real background in D&D, it was so easy. Like, they'd just come up with creative ideas that I would never come up with, because I'm so used to the way things in D&D work that sometimes I get like, oh, this is used for this. This is how this thing works. And they were like, oh, can I use this skill to do this thing. And I was like, I would never think of that. But yes, you can. Let's go along. Also, because they've never played before, as a DM, it's very, I find, light, like a weight off my shoulders. They're not expecting anything of me.
Right.
Like, they just want a good time. I am not living up to which I don't think players do. But I think as a DM, I always have that worry. It's like, ooh, I have to live up to their last DM. I have to live up to the last thing I did even.
Right. So, yeah, and I think what's great right now about the campaign that I'm in is that there's one experienced player. And so when we were starting out, we kind of, like, I don't know about the other, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but I was definitely paying attention to the questions that they were asking. And that really helped me get into the groove of that. But I think I have an idea of how I want to start this, and I just want to get an opinion. Like, I want them to build their characters and then run a one shot with them, completely unrelated to the campaign that I'm building right now, like a pre-built one shot, so that it kind of gives me the experience of DMing, so that I know what kind of things to it's kind of like just looking at a practice run, And I think it's good for them, because then I can be like, oh, well, this is what I would do if I were a player, blah, blah, blah. And that, like, just learn the mechanics of it, because I found that was the hardest part, was doing that. And I guess I just want to ask what everyone's, like, your experience with one shots as well, like taking a completely, like, a story you haven't made on your own and then presenting it to a cast of characters.
I mean, as a player, I love one shots.
Yeah.
Because, the big thing is sometimes as a new player, you get into this concept that building a new character has to really matter to you, because you're going to be playing this character for a while, as if, like, that character can't change for the first little bit. They have to have this specific personality until they can change. And you don't want to be stuck with something that session after session you don't think you necessarily want to play with. But the reality is completely opposite of that. Firstly, because one shots give you the exercise of playing whatever it is you want, learning new rules, making space to ask questions like that. And also, there's an openness in Dungeons and Dragons to choose to leave a character. And people don't necessarily say that. And so I think, it's actually kind of funny as technicians, one of the kind of key things in both tech and design is building a model of something before you make it big. And I think this is kind of an example of that, where you can take something and go, oh, if this happens to end up being good, let's make it bigger. Oh, if this is something that we tried and it ended up being a big dumpster trash fire, we spent so long doing this and no one was having fun because something weird happened, just take it, throw it away, take what you've learned and make something better, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've had some amazing one shots. And it's the only reason I've had the opportunity to try every class in the game.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and from a DM's perspective, I think starting with a one shot is great. And I think letting the players know, so that way they don't. Maybe also they realize at the end of that they're like, oh, I really don't like being a fighter.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I want to give them too.
And like with that. Also, the one shot doesn't have to, be separate from your campaign. Take that one shot. Take something, I'm just going to use the one that I've run multiple times. The Death House from Curse of Strahd has nothing to do with the rest of Curse of Strahd. It can exist outside of Curse of Strahd. I could toss it into the game I'm running with Denny right now and be like, it's a haunted mansion in this icy town that you're all stuck in. And you go there, there was nothing related to the plot. It's just a fun time of chaos and, everything. And at the end of it, people can be like, ooh, I really didn't like that character. Or I didn't like ideas I made with them. I can let them go at this point. Or, I think also just giving them the reassurance, as you also were saying that worry of people not liking what they were playing. Give them that reassurance that nothing is set in stone. I think characters can be retconned. As a DM, feel the privilege to retcon your own thing. Be like, oh, you know what, this isn't working, whether it's a decision I made or something, and just to like be open, don't go too crazy with it, retconning like players' choices. That never do that. But I think something where it's like, I've made a mistake as a DM, or this isn't giving you what you need. Just be like, okay, let's have a roll back for a second. Maybe I said something that confused you, and now we've totally gone off the rails or something.
And extending on the fact that running a one shot before you run this campaign, giving the players a chance to actually realize if they like playing the character they've made. You also in this get to kind of play test what the group kind of likes in an adventure. Because if you're running a pre-scripted or a published one shot, usually those designers will know to include a role play, they'll know to include combat, and they'll know to include exploration, one of each of the 3 pillars of D&D. And after you run that one shot and the players go, oh, I didn't like this, or I liked this, you can then kind of begin to get the idea of, okay, so I need to include more of this when I plan this campaign, more puzzles, less combat, or more role play. So getting their feedback after that will also help you prepare the future adventure.
And also for a first-time DM, I think, similar to the players, you'll realize what you like running.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that is often forgotten about, especially in a lot of the talks around tabletop games, is the DM is a player too. You are a player as much as everyone else at the table. And if you're not having fun, don't DM that thing. And sometimes that does unfortunately mean for a group that you're not the right DM for these players. They're not the right players for your DM style. And that's totally fine. That doesn't mean you aren't a good DM. It's just maybe you're a DM who really likes gritty combat. And there are players who love that and they want really challenging combat, and like combat has really dire consequences. But then there's other players who it's combat is a side thing to the story of their characters, and they want those role play opportunities. And so yeah, it's just that like I think a one shot is great to figure out both ends of what everyone likes. And in the grand scheme of DMing, realizing not every group works like this with the same dynamics. Like if your players are like, all I like to do is explore wilderness, and you're like, I don't like building things in the wilderness, you realize that you're not the best group for that thing. But that doesn't mean either someone else DMs or you find another one that works for you. Like that doesn't mean you all don't play together. It's just you renegotiate that relationship.
That's all really great advice. That's awesome. It's really reassuring to hear that I don't have to do a lot of I'd have to do a lot of work, but I don't have to do all the work. And I think that's a really big misconception about DMing. It's like I know that people like can spend a lot of time on it and do spend a lot of time on it and invest a lot as well. I think with like something that I'm surely not aware of the reality of is playing in person. But in terms of just going back to preparation, as a player, what do you like to receive from the DM? And as the DM, what do you usually give to your players before the campaign starts?
Okay, so this is kind of a let's go over what is the DMs and the players. What are we going to discuss in a session 0? Because that's what we need to have everyone get together and we need to have a conversation about the expectations of the story that we want to tell.
Right, and is like for you guys, like in your session 0s, has it been like are people? I missed our session 0 of the campaign I'm in now, so because I came in later. Like, is that are people in character? Like, do you get to run people in character, or is it really just like a sit down and like a breakdown and being like, hey, like kind of like a table read, I guess.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, that is a good comparison.
Yeah, sorry, I guess it was supposed to be a question, but like, what do you guys do in your session 0?
No, totally. So when it comes to setting the expectations of the campaign, some information that the DM will want to give the players. Well, actually, even before you give information to the players, you got to ask questions first. Like, what kind of game do you want to play? Are we going swashbuckler? Are we going Western? Like, what kind of genre mix are we going with? Do you guys want to do hack and slash, dungeon crawls, or something more open world, Breath of the Wild style? Once you start asking questions about the game they want to play, then you can begin setting down. Like, one of the questions I ask my players when we start playing our games is like, because for the most part, the players I play with, there's going to be a fair bit of combat, I think. And I ask them, what's a monster you've always wanted to encounter in a game that you've never fought before? And that resulted in some great NPC interactions where I'd planned one of these monsters to actually be a friendly ally, and they were just like, he's a monster, kill him. And then they raided his base 3 times in a row because they couldn't beat him after each time they went in.
We're not smart players. We're fun players.
We're here for a good time, not a long time. Dungeons and Dragons.
Nice, Jason. I like that one. But yeah, I guess like, what kind of answers do you get from beginners in that situation? Because they, like, I surely wouldn't know I wouldn't have known how to answer that question without having played a few times.
That's true.
I still don't even know what I like. I like it all. I like it all right now as a beginner player. So it's, yeah, go ahead, Logan.
Think then for your session 0, going in, and I don't necessarily start with like session 0, what, like, are you wanting to play sci-fi or like a, Western or this? I typically come in with like here's kind of the generalness of the world that I'm interested in a DM is running. And then I ask like what type of stuff you like in D&D, which, with beginner players they might not have an answer, and what don't you like? So I have an idea of what not to include for players, and I give an idea. Like, the one that I'm running right now is like, I kind of want to run, there is an element of horror in this world. We don't know what it is yet. We haven't figured it all out. But I was like, moments will be unsettling. Is that something people are down for? Because if everyone's like, no, I'm not about that, I'd be like, okay, either, I don't DM for now, or I still want this world that is, for me, it was this icy wasteland. I still want a game in there. I just rework that on my end. So I think going to your beginner players and just giving kind of here's what, like, the elements of a story that I want in here. Whether it's like, I do want hack and slash heroics. I want, some pulp fiction type stuff. So they kind of know what they're getting into. And then if they're like, I really don't have any interest in, one of those things, you can talk about them, but talk in words that are like genres of fiction and stuff that they would know, as opposed to trying to talk, I think, in just D&D terms.
Okay.
And then usually at a session 0, I think the most important thing you'll get is, especially with a new group, I do recommend everyone try to pick something different to be, to avoid stepping on toes.
Right.
With a more experienced group, you can totally have a group where everyone builds very similar characters, and you're all a bunch of rogues built very similarly, but you will have a fun adventure because you know how to negotiate the space and stuff. But I think sometimes early on it can be a little tempting to want to always, kind of like an improv, you always want to say like yes and doing that to every situation, and unfortunately not like getting that tap out and stuff. Like, you just get into the yes and to everything that's thrown before. It's like, oh, maybe my buddy to the left wanted to say yes to this one, wanted to do the thing, and then figure that out.
Okay.
I think to add to Logan's point, I would argue that conversation is actually 3 separate conversations, because as a player, I have an internal dialogue about the stories that I want to tell as a player. And then I imagine the DM, who is interested in having a particular kind of genre or world or concept that they're like, oh, I think this would be interesting if I made a story around this. And then there's the conversation of the two coming together, where each conversation influences its own. And I feel like one of the kind of major drives to actually coming together to build the initial story is simply on, as far as like kind of in a meta or table sense, just saying, uh, what do you want to experience? And then opening up that. And of course, like it's harder because like there's sometimes with beginner players where that can be such a broad question that you before bringing that question to the table, you can narrow it down. But to kind of give an example of this, our good friend Adam Brewer, to start one of our more recent campaigns, asked, "What's something you haven't done before that you think you'd like to see in a campaign?" And my one big answer I had was multiple villains. I wanted to see something where if you fought one villain, another would have an advantage, where there was a choice being made between like conquering one and letting another succeed.
Wow.
And then that has created a world that currently exists where there's several different guilds that are fighting each other. And there are things, actions going on in the background where he's improvising choices for a second or third villain. And so, like, it can be as simple as just like basic mechanics and constructs of a story, which you can break away from Dungeons and Dragons and just think about it in a theatrical sense, where it's like, what kind of interesting sort of doohickeys and boobinkles do you like to see when you're telling a story?
We might be thinking a bit too experienced as well. I think really if we come back to the basis of this question, maybe what you should do is if you have an idea, just pitch it to your players. Because frankly, if we're being honest, a new group of players are likely not going to make characters that necessarily fit well into your setting regardless. Like somebody's probably going to be an edgy rogue. Somebody's probably going to be a seductive bard. And they might not exactly fit the theme or mood of the campaign you're running. So instead, I would think try not to be a good player group right away. Instead, just try to have fun with it. And as the story develops, you guys might find the flavor, the theme, the mood of good role play and good story. Like maybe have some adventures that aren't exactly tied to your main story right away, just so they can also discover who they are and how they fit into the world you've proposed.
Right. That's sort of where I've actually been heading in my own head, in like just throughout this conversation. It's like, you guys are gurus. This is incredible. What were you gonna say, Logan? I interrupted you.
Oh, I was also, and I think it's like something that has been said a lot. Is like, you know, talking about like the story we want to create as a DM and stuff. And I think one thing is also, I also don't necessarily, as a DM, and this kind of I think goes back to the prep, I don't prep a story for the campaign, like almost ever. I start as I did with the one that Denny's in right now, and other ones. I'll usually start with like 5 sets of just like small quests to start things off. They can pick up, and kind of from there, I figure out like, oh, you know, this is what they're liking from this and stuff as we're going. This is, you know, things that their characters have said that are influencing things. And, you know, it's probably before there's like, you know, what you could look back on as like the story of the campaign. I probably have gotten a good chunk of sessions under the belt with the group, with the session 0 stuff. I think also going back to something is with a new group of players, it's a great time to just be like, their characters, you know, as Denny said, they're not going to all want to make ones that jive well and whatnot. They're just going to want to make a character, and it's they're adventurers that second the dice hit the table, the second you're all sitting together, they can have as little backstory as they want, as they feel comfortable as a player. And I don't think it's something that you necessarily need to stress about. I think you just like kind of are like, this is the adventure of, you know, John, Bill, and Sally. I'm really great with names.
I will also say I have 100% showed up to as a player into a campaign, and I'm like, I have no backstory, and we're just gonna make it up as we go. And then, like, you just like you'll have a social interaction. You'll be like, my brother. I have a brother. So, and I think that there's some amount of that the DM can get away with as well, right?
Oh yeah. Write down those things though. I think that is like key advice. You make
that
something
is
up, you
actually-
write it down.
Yeah. Once you make an artistic choice that affects the story, write it down. And what's actually I find, one of Denny's magical traits as a DM is to bring all of that writing back. He's very clever in bringing things back from sessions ages ago that end up being very fun surprises.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, I learned way too late how important note taking is, and now I just keep a running Word document of all of my D&D notes, and it's very hard to follow.
The one I use for names, and this happened a lot on the pirate ship campaign that I was running before. For some things, I just asked the players to name them, like their crewmates. I was like, "What's the name of your crewmate?" Other times, I forgot the names, and it wasn't like an NPC on the ship. And I would be like, I'd ask in a way that's not me being like, what's the name to the players, but I'd ask them something. And if they also couldn't figure out the name, I'd make up another name, and that would be the name going forward. Because you will forget to write something down. It will probably be the name of like a shopkeep.
Right.
That suddenly the players get attached to for no reason. They will get attached to things for no reason.
Mm-hmm. Even silly things like that can add to the fun of the game. Like Logan's saying in this specific example, we were naming like a bunch of the crew, and Logan would sometimes just falter on a name. So we ended up with 4 Susans in our crew, and we're just like, these are the 4 Susans. And apparently one of them is a spy, because that's fun.
Oh man, 4 Susans. That's the exact amount of Susans you want.
That is excellent.
4 Susans and a tailor named Taylor.
Yep.
Wow. Where can you get any better than that?
I get paid to be creative, people.
But in reality,
this is too funny.
As a DM, something I make sure to do, something you can't improvise, at least it works for Logan, but not for me. I make sure I have a list of names, and if I need a name, I just cross it off the list, and I go, that's who that is now. So I'm not stuck with Tyler, Bob, Susan, and Walt. I don't know. Having a hard time improvising normal names.
So I guess like, man, I had all these questions, and they've all now like I didn't expect us to get through all these questions. I was like, this is gonna take anyway. I guess one, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this to both player and DM, but I guess what was your least favorite choice you made as a DM, and what's the as a player, what's a choice that a DM made that you were like, that was not what I wanted, that was not good, this is going to kill the story, and what was the fallout of it?
As a player, one of my least favorite choices was, and we were all being silly. It was in a campaign that 3 of us played in with Adam. And Adam was like, I should have just let you do this when we talked about it. But I tried to slide down a mountain on my shield, and my character died by the end of that. And it was just like, it was so unsatisfying for a joke. But as a DM, it's probably that's probably the same things that I've done myself. And that's probably why for me it was like such a, this sucked choice. Because I've almost certainly done that too, where players try to do something, they'll be fun and silly, and I take it too literally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that's going to actually affect anything. Like, maybe don't be silly if you're like talking to a king who already hates your party. But I think, there's times where it's like people want to do something silly and just light and fun, and I make it a little too serious, and then suddenly it has really heavy consequences for their character and their story. And then, I look back on those as a DM, and I was like, did I just ruin a session for someone accidentally, or have I now like drastically somehow changed their characters or just like taken a moment away from the players that would have just been a fun, goofy, all those lovely goofy stories you get to read about on like Reddit and Twitter and stuff that this player could have had. So that's for me. It's like making not serious things too serious and then being like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that.
I should have clarified like how, but that's a really good story. I imagine riding the shield is kind of like Legolas riding the shield down the staircase.
I had just played Breath of the Wild. I just wanted to be Link, I'm pretty sure.
Fair enough. But like, sorry, I meant though, what was a choice made by a DM as a player that you didn't agree with, or that you were like, that was kind of a failure. But I'll take a choice you made as a player too. Whatever you want to share.
Well, I think for me it was like the and you know, I'm thinking of that the same when I'm DMing. It's that choice that you make as the DM on how to interpret a player's actions.
Right.
Another DM choice, which I've seen done really well, Denny ran this really well, was mass scale combat. And Denny took a system and adapted it because it wasn't finished, and it was really beautifully done and gave players a lot to do. Like we all got quickly through actions and we're doing a lot. Recently, and a fantastic DM who I'm playing with, but it's a me choice. I realize like it's just the way that I like to play the game. Has mass scale combat where we're all controlling like 20 units, so everyone's turn takes really long. So that's just like a DM choice. It's like that choice of how to run those things for me as a player, and it's totally a personal preference. I think there's some groups that will probably love that idea of controlling 20 individual groups of soldiers.
Right.
But yeah, that's really, I don't know if there's like a consistent thing or a story thing that I've ever had that was like totally took me out as a player. It's usually like mechanic things that just bog things down for me.
Okay.
So to re-clarify, this question is a DM choice that was poor in the eyes of the players.
And and a choice that you've made as a DM.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I've got one where I was the DM, and this is kind of one of my regret choices, because I'm very much not a confrontational person, so I can be like pretty passive aggressive at times. But I've gotten better at this. But during one game, I had somebody who was playing a wild magic sorcerer. So and that character entails like when they use magic, some random things will happen. And I think we had a bit of a heated, unspoken dispute between the two of us because they were kind of breaking my game and they weren't doing things that I liked. And I think I was being a no person for what their prompts were. And I kind of abused that mechanic to kind of hinder their game instead of just after the session talking to them about what they were doing. So I think not communicating is one of my biggest regrets when it comes to the game. And it's so important to talk to your players if things aren't, if they're uncomfortable, if you're uncomfortable, or just having a conversation, either stop the session if it's immediately debilitating or have it after or before the session.
All right. I can get on board with that.
Yeah, I guess to jump off of Denny's point, I feel like that what your question brings up in me is all the moments that I like to call oh darn moments, where I want to do something really, really badly. I look at a situation as a player and I'm like, yes, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to cast the spell Grease and I want to throw it exactly 60 feet up on that tower and make that person slip off of their catapult. Like, there's this thing that I really want to do. And then, for whatever reason within the realm of the world or the realm of the rules, that thing doesn't actually work. And it's tough because you don't want to actually break the world. And it depends on the kind of scale and scope of the rules you had been following within either that session or the game itself. But you also want to empower the players to do like sick, nasty, fun things. And at least I've found, like as I've continued to make those mistakes more frequently, I realized the solution was, as Denny said, to communicate it. As opposed to assuming I can do the action, I say like, "Hey, wouldn't this be cool? Like, can I do this thing?" And I don't assume that I know. And the difficulty is that I think that as a newer player, when I was starting, I didn't have that conversation because I didn't know to have that conversation. Where I was just assuming that I could do that because I had that spell and I thought that was the way it worked. And I think that navigating that has helped take away from the moments and has created an opportunity to still be creative, but still basically open it up for the DM to say no. Now, as far as actually working with beginning players, I know there's not much advice in there other than communicate. And maybe what that means is that in your session 0, if you're playing with someone that's never played before, just literally say that. You can say if there's something really cool you want to do but you're not sure it works, ask. Or if you as a DM brain is I know that wouldn't work, you can always fudge the rules a little. You can do an alternate skill check or something. You can choose to try to do something in the game where you can choose to actually change the consequences. You can make the consequences exist but be less severe. I know many times I should have died from something, but instead I break my character's wrist or something. There's this hilarious story actually. I was the first time I was playing a complete evil campaign, and we wanted to raid a bunch of goblins. But unfortunately, the way the goblin scenario was set up, there was just too many goblins for level 1 characters. And then what ended up they TKO'd us. These goblins TKO'd us. It was completely unintentional. It just happened to be that way. It was hilarious. But what happened was instead of our characters dying, there was various consequences that happened to our bodies. And so, for example, with my character, one of their fingers was bitten off. And so they only had 4 fingers on their left hand. And so, there are ways that you can choose to just change consequences as a means of empowering people to avoid moments where you kind of get into those conflicts of rules. And I think I feel like it must take practice. I'm not going to speak on behalf of DMs, but that kind of thing would take practice. But ultimately, I think with beginner players, it's okay to slow down. It's okay to not rush and rush and rush through the gameplay to get to the good bit, because you always know you're going to have another session, and you agree as the party to stop, right? If there's something it's not completely done yet, you can keep going a half an hour, or you can stop early, knowing that you have content that in the next session you want to all spill out. And so I think it all kind of comes back to communication, as Denny said. I think.
I do want to touch on something you brought up there too, Jason. One, as a player, something I've seen a DM do that I wasn't big into is you'll inevitably, there will be these moments when players will be like, all right, we got to devise this plan in order to make this situation work. And the DM almost always made sure that the plan didn't work. And I don't think that's good. I think rewarding players for thinking is super important. And I support allowing their plans to go through. If it's not the best plan, maybe throw a complication in there to make it interesting, but don't let the plan just flub out because you're like, it's not completely realistic. Well, guess what? We're playing a game with magic and elves, so let's throw science a bit out the window.
To another thing that Jason said though about not rushing, what I guess okay, so for me, I think I'm like a 4-hour game, and that's good with me. How long do you usually let your game run for? I would say average, because I know it can go long, or as you said, if you got enough content, it could go short. But on average, what do you like to play as a DM, and what do you like to, and what are players more inclined to feel out?
I think it what I like to play as a DM is what the players at the table will engage with. Which is such a BS answer from my part, because I would love to run a day, we take a Sunday off and we just play all day. I would love that so much. Is it realistic? No. Would my players, many of them, probably get bored? Yeah, I think so. I think attention spans and stuff, and just, that's a lot for some people. But I found between 3 to 5 is a good range. I like to sit at 5 because I do like longer sessions, because I never feel as a DM. I don't like to rush the players into anything unless it's like really, I'm starting to realize like they're talking in circles or they're just like, it's an urgent thing. But it's like, oh, if they want to spend time in town, they want to, really kind of figure out some stuff, I'm down. I love letting them talk. And that's, half of my session might just be my players talking, which I find, if it's a 3-hour session and I have sometimes 2 hours where I don't do anything and the entire thing, it's like, oh, there's 1 hour to push things along might not be enough for me. So yeah, I like 5. But I think it's figure out what your players can handle. I'm in one that I'm playing in right now where our sessions average 3 hours, because life, people have dogs and dogs don't give a shit about D&D. They want to go on a walk when they go on a walk.
Fair enough. You gotta treat your dogs right.
That's right.
Yeah, you got to treat your dog right. You got to treat yourself right. If you're doing a long session, bathroom breaks, food breaks, you need them.
For sure.
I was going to say, in all seriousness, although it's a funny point, the amount of time I play D&D is strictly dependent on the number of slices of pizza available in between the 3 to 5 hour sessions.
This is so true to character.
Each slice adds another 10 minutes for Jason. You buy that guy a whole pizza, you're getting an extra hour and like a half of him.
That's incredible.
Exactly. It's the currency of my time, truly.
That's a great equation.
But yeah, I think part of it is also just, of course, asking the players, right? I think that a lot of people who have played D&D can agree they want to do like great long sessions. But as part of the DM, it's just there's a little bit of coordinating the players to understand how long they want to play for. And that includes yourself. That's another thing. And I think that that's really important, that concept that the DM is also a player. Like if you're at a point where you're like super exhausted, that's the time to start wrapping it up, or that's the time. And that can include splitting a one shot in half and making it 2 sessions. Because it's a game, there is no inherent pressure to actually finish it within the timeline that you've said. You're telling a story. Sometimes the story runs long, and that's the way it is.
No timeline, unless it's the last session and one player is moving to Stratford. Then you will stay up for 13 hours.
But that is a specific player restriction, right? And you'll know that in advance.
Yeah.
So my answer to this is 4 hours. Because I get tired after 4. Being a DM exhausts me. Being a player, much, much easier. But yeah, sometimes when a Logan, for example, has to move away and you've got 1 more or maybe 2 more sessions in the campaign, you're like, well, we'll just mash them into 1 session. We'll play a 13-hour day. Holy hell, it'll be the most exhausting day.
And there's your Sunday.
Yeah, I think it was a Sunday.
It was a Sunday. And we started at about, I think people got to my house at about 1, and we ended a bit past 1 in the morning.
So what I'm hearing is that Logan wanted to play all day on a Sunday, and so decided to move to Stratford.
Yeah. I actually didn't have a job in Stratford. It was a shitty year. I made up this whole thing about working at the theater there to get a long D&D session.
It was the only thing you could think of. He didn't think to communicate to the DM.
I commit to the bit.
Yeah. Look, this has to happen.
Yeah, I communicate through tyranny.
That's incredible.
But also, just one thing I do want to add, because I think Jason said something that just made me think, I hope I'm not repeating what someone said, is as a DM, also within your sessions, in the communication that we've been talking so much about, like players will make choices that you could never predict that will drastically change what you think would happen. And you might be like, oh boy, they have said they were going to do things, and I've said this in a podcast before, it's like they said they were going to do things in the last session and 180'd that this session. And so everything I have prepped is going to go away, or partway through the session, they do that. Everything I have prepped can't be used right now. Always feel free. They're your friends. You're hopefully a person. They will understand. Hopefully they're your friends, and hopefully you are a person. But just be like, hey, can we take a 20-minute food break or something, or washroom breaks, or I need half an hour. you don't always have to just end the session because you're like, oh boy, I have nothing there. Sometimes you just need half an hour to quickly jot some stuff down, and that's enough to start going on that next thing. And suddenly it's like, that's where stealing comes in handy. Steal a map, bam, we're now in another town fighting pirates or something.
Mm-hmm. And same with having that single sentence description of a location. You at least have an idea if they do 180 from what they'd planned to be like, okay, I kind of know what's over there. Let's go with it.
Fair enough. I'm gonna have to dust off my improv skills. This is gonna be it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be hard. I'm not good at improv. I shouldn't be a DM. No, I'm kidding. But
did you enjoy your 4 hours of prep? I realize this is not something that I think any of us asked you when you said that you prepped for 4 hours instead of 1.
Oh, I totally enjoyed it. I got so lost. And I think what I liked about it was that it was like writing, not that I've ever written fan fiction, but it was like writing fan fiction for my own fiction.
I think that's just called being an author.
Yes, but you know what I mean. It's like
Yes.
like what are you? These are all the things that I love about these kinds of stories. I'm gonna write this in. This is like, I don't know. I spend a lot of time talking to a certain group of friends about how we would have done the Star Wars sequels, and I think we could have done it. You know, and so I kind of got into that brain of like, what are all the things that I love to see in stories? Here we go. Yeah, it's being an author.
I was going to say, if you you're worried about the improv and you enjoy the prep, over prep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like prep a lot of things. I don't think you have to like fully flesh things out and accept that things will change, but like I find for myself, I really like making like dungeon maps.
Mm-hmm.
So I will make those maps, even if I have, I have to rush for a session and stuff. I'll still, maybe it won't be a map for the players, but I'll scrawl out that map for that little battle, that dungeon, whatever it is. And yeah, I think you find those things that are fun for you, and if prepping is that one of those things, it can take the weight off the things that aren't fun for you, which is why I also am like, steal the things that aren't fun for you.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And so my issue right now is that I've gotten attached to certain things, and I know I'm gonna have to restructure as the story goes on. But I also think it's like, I think what I enjoy about it being a player right now is that I see a story ahead of me. I know that we're working towards something as a group, and it's not all on me as a player to dictate where the story goes. I just have to give my DM the how. And I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't know if for all I've experienced in D&D, there's not a right or wrong. So I just, like, I assume as DMs, you've both had an experience where you've probably done one more than the other, where it's been like dictating the general plot line and then letting your characters flesh it out. And as a player, also just being in that situation where you have to do a bit more legwork than other times. Like, what do you guys, I think we already answered this, but I don't know. I guess, like, what do you enjoy about it? Like, being sort of more in control than in other ways of the story than not being. My questions are not clear tonight. It's been I woke up really early today.
That makes sense.
I think I get you.
What do you enjoy about kind of being a DM?
What do you enjoy, or how much do you enjoy having more power over the story than not?
Right. Yeah.
And I know, like, you've said that you've just not written a story, or that you don't like writing the story, but like I'm sure you have before. Like, you wouldn't figure that out by having not done it before. So, like, what didn't you enjoy about it?
So it's actually really interesting. I've never really tried to. I think maybe once I've tried to really write it out. I think the Eberron one that I ran, that Denny was in, I tried to write out, I think, a lot more things than I like, and it just felt like I was forcing everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was forcing things to happen, which I didn't like. And I don't think, I think people get this notion that like it should always be a sandbox open world for the players, and I don't think that's true. I think the the rails are there, and it's about the, for lack of a better term, the illusion of choice. And what that illusion truly is, I think varies. For me, I think it's that there's multiple sets of rails that I have that don't go anywhere, and as the players make choices, they're actually kind of dictating which set of rails they're going and what end they're getting to a bit more than some people who I think kind of get an A, B, and C and the players fill out the middle. Of like, A, B, and C will happen to some extent, but we'll let the players figure out the who, why, where's, when's, and what's on the way. And for me, it's partially because I have so many ideas, so many small things I would love to see and I'd love to do that I'd love to throw in just a lot of small things there. The start of the campaign that Denny that is in right now started with essentially a job quest board. That's really what it was. One of the players is a prisoner. He has to go in and do work for the town every day. And so it started with that. And the first session for that one, I did just have one thing just to get everyone familiar with each other. I think the first session is fine for me to do that. But then the next time he went, there were 3 things. Will the players ever know what the other 2 are? Maybe. But maybe there's a timer on some of those things. And they'll come back in other ways. It doesn't mean that it's fully gone, but it just might mean I want the players, what makes sense for their characters, what they feel compelled to. Because maybe, checking out hidden treasure in a mountain sounds more appealing to them than fighting off bandits. Not every session, but maybe that session. And yeah, I like to give players control in the world, and I also feel it makes my job easier because I want to, for my own world building, I really like to build all these things in the world. Mm-hmm. There's kingdoms and empires that the players haven't gone into that I know a lot about because this world is alive, and this world's also doing things while the players aren't there. It's not like they're, and I have, it's something I've tried for the first time in this one. I actually have a calendar for the world. And so last session was Christmas in the world.
Nice.
But it also means if they spend 3 weeks off, that's 3 weeks that everything else in the world will continue. Mm-hmm. Not off as we're not playing for 3 weeks. Yeah. Just, I mean, their characters are for 3 weeks we're doing downtime. So yeah, I probably went off on a weird tangent there, but
no, that was helpful. That's I think that's really cool. It's kind of more like an open world than a straight up RPG at that point.
Yeah.
The rails are still there. Every quest unfortunately does have to I need to know the quest's trajectory.
Yeah.
There are very heavy things in some of these quests that will lead to other things most likely, but I don't want it to be they have to do that other thing. I think that's the thing is I never want something to be, if they don't do this, then the campaign stops.
Right.
Yeah. Until near the end. I find the end of my campaigns, and sorry, I've been talking a lot on this one. The end of my campaigns get very much more narrowed. I start large. Right. There's a lot of choices, but eventually there has to be an end. And I think that needs to get a little curated more so. But that's where I'm going to stop. I've been talking a lot.
I think to your point, Logan, I'd like to just briefly interject. And I think Denny will he may correct me and choose to say this in another way. But I thought it was interesting, Jonnathan, when you said the players bring the how, because I think that's an illusion. Because I've definitely played in games where the DM has brought the how, where it's you must go and get the magic wand to lower the barrier to go and slay the dragon with a crystal ball of ice. Wow. It's very here are the
Why not just at Denny next time?
but what I want to say is that can despite the fact that it may seem like there is a level of railroading, there's also to kind of add to the metaphor of rails, there are ways to drive the train on the rails. Because there's who is driving the train. Is it rocking? Is it smooth? I think that real railroading is dictating exactly the pace that the train is traveling, not necessarily just setting the rails, because the players are arguably the participants running the train. So don't feel bad about delivering rails, because the players ride rails, because the adventuring group is the train. What you have to be really concerned about is driving the train. That's dictating who does what, where they're doing it, when they're doing it, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it. You can deliver one of those 5 things and let the players fill out the other 4. You can do 2 and 3, whatever sort of mishmash you want to do. It can be find this person. So you say who, and then you let them figure out where. You might not even know where. You may just decide where after they investigate for 3 days. You're like, oh, yeah, that's where they are. That's where they always were. But that's not necessarily the case. Like, you can actually just let them progress through a story. And I think that ultimately your goal is to lay the rails, because it's the difference. Like, railroading is kind of a funny term, because I would argue that what you actually want to avoid is like literally setting everything for them, as opposed to letting them drive the train, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
I
hear you there.
I really like what you said there, Jason, because that is actually very beautiful. And what Logan said is funny to me, because I have an opposite answer, but our explanations are kind of the same. I always include a story within the games I run, because something I firmly believe in is, when a campaign starts, what is the big shift? For example, of the campaign that Logan and Jason were in, the dragons have taken over the surface world and humanity has fled underground for 250 years. The big shift is there's spirits are becoming more common, ghosts, undead are rising, so something's happening. And in writing the story, like we were saying, every player's got a story. And again, the DM is a player, and I think the DM should also have a story. But the trick with the DM story is tying the other players into your story in order to make them also invested in it, to want to drive that train like Jason was describing.
All right. Yeah.
And that's that conversation with the players again, figuring out what their want is. And then you can place their wants and their answers along the tracks on the way to completing your story that you've kind of had in mind.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That's fair. I like that.
But I also agree with Logan in the sense of including bits and pieces that the players can explore within your world. But what I would do then is make it relevant to the story again, to always give them the option to come back in at some point. Like, in this game I was running, they had to go get the 3 MacGuffins to go open this ancient city to go learn something. And I decided one of the MacGuffins was in this gang's hideout. They found the MacGuffin, but then they went to go raid the other hideout that they were originally working with. And in there, I included treasure that was a legendary item, a sword that was cursed and also used by a legendary figure within the story of this game. One of the players got it, they became berserk, and then Jason also had technically what was a legendary item that could incidentally destroy this other one that they had found, this cursed one. And so these seemingly irrelevant items began to play with each other and just make everyone kind of question what's happening. Why is Jason's character suddenly not Dora the Explorer and rather a ranger, having been affected by essentially Mercury this whole time?
Wow.
Yeah. And wasn't there didn't I find one of the items in our first session?
Yeah. And that was me after the fact. I gave you this item and I later went, this now has more importance than I initially thought.
And that's the thing is me as a player never knew that it wasn't always this important item. I could probably if I thought about it really hard, have figured it out with the way I found it. But as a player, no, I am your players will invest in things. And so there's things that you might be like, oh boy, that doesn't make 100% sense. It makes 80%, makes maybe 70, still a pass. But it's not 100%. But your players are invested in this enough that that 30% that's missing, they're not going to notice. Everything doesn't always have to be perfect. You know, none of us are professional storytellers and, you know, whatnot. I guess we work in theater. I guess we are. But regardless of the fact, you know, we're not getting paid to write epics. We're not, you know, George R.R. Martin writing a book. I guess he doesn't do that either.
But actually, like, even as professionals in theater, what makes it onto the stage isn't the first pass.
Yeah.
Right?
And yeah, it's just like, you know, they'll be invested. I think, you know, that don't beat yourself up because you didn't figure out every little thing and make it picture perfect. It's like good enough is good enough and everyone will love it. Like as long as you're having fun, you're with friends and like you're having a good time, the nitty gritty stuff doesn't matter as much. I'm not saying throw it away, but like, you know, be forgiving, like,
right.
And make mistakes, make them big, make them loud.
I'm going to be coming to you all so much about all this because I think this has been really, really, I mean, super helpful. But I just like, I mean, I feel like I know that I'm in over my head. Having not even completed one campaign as a player and jumping into DMing, I just, I mean, there's not much else to do right now. But
I don't think you're in over your head. I think like you've got this. For sure. I had never finished a campaign when I started DMing.
I guess that's true, yeah. You were kind of thrown in the deep end too.
And like I ran a terrible one shot the first time I did it. We did one encounter and all wanted to never play again. The first time I ran something. And we all now play D&D so much.
Right.
So I think there's only failing upwards.
All right.
Also, when mistakes become canon, it's the best. So.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that as a player as well. Just like, oh, well, this is it now. All right, great, let's roll with it. Yeah, that's been a really fun part of the game. Yeah, I think those are all of my questions. Without getting into too many specifics about the actual story, because I think I'm gonna have to rework a lot of things. But yeah, no, it's
you surprisingly know where to find us all.
Yeah,
yeah, that's true.
Unlike everyone else, you have the power to ask us questions anytime.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely gonna send this this little treatment I have, to borrow a theater term, your way, and maybe get to pick your brains on some specifics. But it's I had the story is basically the movie Rat Race meets the Hunger Games. It's like it's got political turmoil. It's got some racial things, but it's also like a race between different groups of people towards a treasure, and the treasure just happens to be freedom. Yeah, that's sort of the direction it was taking, but I don't know. Now this has got me thinking about more of an open concept. Anyway, thank you again. This has been super helpful.
I'm glad we could help. This was a lot of fun to just talk about this kind of stuff, and hopefully the listeners at home, hopefully you're able to take something out of all this too, if you're planning your own games.
It's pretty crazy, like, that we've known each other for this long, and I think this is probably the longest for sure. Not the first, but definitely the longest we've ever talked about Dungeons and Dragons.
Probably true. Yeah.
I definitely knew you guys played in university, but I would just like be like, oh yeah, you guys played Dungeons and Dragons. That's cool.
You were too cool for us then.
No, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't that. I was always a nerd.
I know, that's true.
But,
you got me into comics, so
hey, but no, I like being a commuter was it was a hard thing. I don't think I could have played Dungeons and Dragons, done as much work we did in school, and have commuted.
Yeah,
that was difficult. Like, you all lived on campus, right? Or in the village?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've had a lot of conversation, and now, with all the business out of the way, I suppose, I'm going to play a game with my guests. So, what we're going to be doing today is the first game that appeared on this podcast. I'm going to be giving you guys a story. However, there's a bunch of blanks missing in it, and I'm going to need your help to fill them in. This is Mad Venture Libs. So,
I love it.
I'm sure you guys are familiar with the rules of Mad Libs. I give you a category of some sort. I need you guys to fill it in with a word. And then I'll be plugging these words into the story I've generated. And then I will read to you the story with what is likely to be hilarious words inserted into places they likely shouldn't be. And
I like it.
So yeah, when I pitch these categories to you guys, like whoever spouts out what, if multiple people spout out a word, like just talk amongst yourselves to decide on which is the best between yous and give me your final answer. But in the meantime, let's get this going. So the first thing I need is a monster.
Minotaur.
All
Yeah.
right.
I'll go with Minotaur. I like that. Final answer.
Final answer. Fantastic. A title / honorific. You know, like Lord.
Laird.
Laird?
Laird. Like a Scottish lord. It's a Scottish Minotaur.
Amazing.
I'm into it.
All right. Lastly, a name? Not lastly.
Diana.
Diana?
Diane, it is.
I like it.
A place.
Crumpleville.
Chuck E. Cheese. Oh.
Oh, I gotta go with Crumpleville. I like that.
Crumpleville. Fantastic. A noun.
Porta potty. A porta potty for now, technically, right?
Yeah, porta potty
It's
is
a
a noun.
thing.
It is a thing. It's also a place.
Ooh,
All right. I forgot this had to be a plural one, so I'll make it porta potties.
very good.
Even better.
Another
You
noun.
never just see one.
Yeah, anywhere that should have porta potties should at least have two, you would think.
That's just good sense.
Noun is what I'm looking for right now.
Oh, a noun? A penny. Just a penny.
A penny. All right, and
For the
another
young
noun.
listeners, those are just 1 cent.
1 cent, that's right.
For all those kids
Uh.
making unboxing videos and listening to this podcast, a penny is 1 cent.
If you're eating Tide Pods right now, that is 1 cent. All right, a noun ending in ER.
A noun ending in fucker.
Got him.
All right, I forgot to mention this podcast isn't. I'm not going to restrict you guys in language, so that's totally fine.
I learned it the last time I played this game. This is not a PG podcast.
No, an adjective.
Vigorous.
Moistly. Or
Yes.
does it just be
Two
moist?
very different things.
I think it would just be moist.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
we'll go
it
with
is
just be
moist,
moist.
but you
It is
do
moist.
Moist.
an adverb might be moistly.
I
like
think
you do
an adverb
something
is moist.
moistly.
Yes.
A plural noun.
Ovens.
cameras. Oh, ovens is much better. Let's go with ovens. Let's go.
Ovens. Excellent. A verb.
Fart.
Farting.
Wow. All right.
It's my second favorite F word on this podcast so far.
Another plural noun.
Cauldrons.
Cauldrons.
I'm very into cooking.
I've noticed.
He cooks his
Oh.
farts in a cauldron of ovens.
Oh,
Exactly.
no. Moist ovens. Oh,
Mm.
dear. All right. Occupation.
Fucker.
I was going to say like a
I-
seeing eye dog.
I'll say gigolo in lieu of fucker.
I'm still sticking with seeing eye dog.
See, okay, you know what? Seeing eye dog. We got to
Sure,
support the
let's go with
dogs.
eye dog. That's
D
right.
and D. It's the secret D of
Dogs
D&D.
and dogs.
Yeah.
You think it's
I
about
love it.
dungeons? It's just dogs all the way down.
Holy crap. All right. Another verb.
Hiking. Why not?
Edit out my of thinking.
All I could think of were like really inappropriate verbs. I was like, all right, I'm just going to stay quiet. I already got
Right.
fucker in there.
We need some level of sanity.
I used all of
On
my
the
thought on
show.
farting. So
Yeah, took all the brain power to figure that one out, eh?
yeah.
I'm done
Um,
thinking for the day.
The big brain plays.
Jason, I'm gonna change it to hike because it's not a past tense verb.
Got it.
Okay. Another noun. This is the second last one.
Fork.
No, oh,
Fork.
Fork.
I love it. last one. It's another noun.
Oh,
Princess.
Okay, contest. Who said what?
I said
sport.
Princess.
You again both
JLS,
said...
you're the tiebreaker.
Logan, I'm sorry. It's got to be spork.
That's fine.
You guys, you're not going to regret that. Okay. So, are you guys ready to hear the story that you have constructed?
Always.
You bet.
Oh, yeah.
All right. The forces of darkness are stirring. The Minotaur Laird Diana and his red wizards of Crumpleville are building an army of porta potties. To create such abominations, they will use their new invention, the penny fucker.
Okay.
The adventuring party, known as the Moist Ovens, has been tasked to fart the enemy castle and destroy the invention. My God. First, they will need to get past the cauldrons. The party's seeing eye dog should be able to talk their way in. Second, they will need to hike around the castle without drawing attention to themselves. And finally, destroy the penny fucker. But be warned, if you should run into Minotaur Laird Diana, pray to your fork, for they will offer you no spork. Oh,
That's incredible.
Holy heck.
That was way
Well done,
better.
guys.
Spork was the superior choice.
Oh, I thought spork was so good. Oh my goodness.
I had a feeling about it.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's the
it was good.
knee-jerk reaction to anybody's using the noun fork.
You need spork.
Yeah.
It's like, what would be better right now? A spork.
Oh, you
It's
gotta keep it
true.
for because you're getting offered no spork. Oh God.
Right.
Well,
That was great. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you guys for that. Unfortunately, Logan has a time constraint, so we're gonna be saying goodbye to him at this point.
Bye, everyone. You already know who I am. I've said bye before. I will say bye in the future.
Indeed. And I'll plug your social media at the end of this as well.
Awesome.
He says he will.
Have a great night, everyone. Remember to
Thanks for
fork
joining
your
us.
sporks.
Oh my God. Well, that brings us on to our last segment of the podcast. If I can find my notes, geez. So our next segment is our chance to hear from you, the listeners. This is Question Dicely. So today's question comes from Edmund_Clark_official on Instagram. And Edmund asks, what moment helped you realize how to gauge challenge rating as a first-time DM? Unfortunately, now that Logan's gone, I don't know if Jason understands challenge rating as well. Jason, do you?
I know about challenge rating. Like, I have an understanding of it. However, challenge rating is always dicey and complicated because you never actually know inherently what the players are going to do. And in terms of what their own kind of knowledge of their own characters are. And at least from what I've read, challenge rating assumes that you know your character inside and out. So I would argue that with challenge, because we've kind of talked about communication over the course of this podcast, you can always step up the challenge in some way, shape, or form. But I would argue that you should start light and then play with the characters as you get to know them and as you get to know their skill level in combat. And challenge rating as a number in the DM guide in comparison to the number of players and their level and abilities, it can be like an immediate tracker, but you can always be like, okay, let's step it down one little bit. And then maybe if they're having an easy time of it, put in an earthquake or do some sort of terrain change or additional reinforcements. There's always things you can do in the moment to up the challenge, but you can never lower the challenge without it being kind of strange.
The way I kind of view challenge rating is if a monster is the same CR as the level of the party, that's probably going to be the a solo monster. For example, if you've got a party of 4 first level characters, you'll probably want to use a CR1 creature. So yeah, challenge rating is D&D's way of kind of gauging the difficulty of fighting a monster. And it's honestly not like Jason was saying, it's not the best way to kind of gauge a monster, because like we were talking about earlier, we got into a fight with a bunch of goblins, which should be easy, but based on how many of them there are, that having more monsters also makes a fight difficult. So gauging combat is difficult. So like if you've got access to the book called Xanathar's Guide to Everything, I think that book kind of lays down the best formula of building like numbers as far as an encounter goes. But I'd say a general rule, try to include, if you're going to go a lot, maybe 2 monsters per player at most, unless you're trying to overwhelm them and take them hostage or something along those lines in the story. What are your thoughts on challenge rating, Jonnathan? Have you thought about it much since you've been preparing?
I have, and what's great about my supervisor right now, I should say my partner in the theater I work at, he's also really into D&D, and so he lent me his DM guide and monster manual recently, and so I've been delving into that a little bit, and it's exactly what you guys said. Like it's hard to gauge, even just like with my knowledge as a player, because like I've encountered things that I was like, oh, this is gonna be a cakewalk, and like my character almost died from a swarm of porcelain dolls that came to life and tried to kill us. I was throwing my shatter spells everywhere and they were like blowing up, but then they overwhelmed me and I was like, oh, well, damn. And then I'm the only healer in the group. Or I thought I was. And then I was like, I think I threw 2 death saves before someone was like, oh, wait, I have a healing spell. And I was like, God damn it. But like, yeah, like if you've ever been a player, you can call on your experience to know like what you can handle, because like you'll have the experience of you yourself not being confident against like a creature or monster like that, and also like know what like your people in your party did in those moments, and you can sort of extrapolate that kind of stuff. I feel just using your own experience and the experience of your group for however long you've been playing, and just like say like, oh, well, if I was this group, if I were this player, what would my gut reaction be to this? And in the chance that you think that it's not enough of a challenge, like, yeah, like throw in reinforcements, throw in another creature, split their attention. There are other ways of upping the challenge with low challenge rating monsters.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. I find it's easier to make a combat more difficult if you started off too easy than it is to go back the other way. There are ways to do it, but it's definitely easy to make it harder.
Yeah, and like in my experience as well, like we've come across things that I've been like, oh man, this is gonna take the rest of the night, and then we're through it, and it's like, oh, well, that was great. And it like if that happens and your players are like they get past the monster with ease, like I know as a player, for me, that gives me a huge confidence boost. I'm like, damn, I'm really good at D&D. I could keep doing this for the rest of my life because I'm that good. I just got through this monster. I'm great. And like having your players get that confidence boost, I know it definitely made me more invested in the game. I was like, I can't wait to do this again next week. I'm just kicking ass all over the place.
Yeah. It's important for a DM to include those easy fight. Not everyone has to be like you're fighting for your life. Like give them the fights where they so easily overcome the enemy that they feel like great heroes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like not every villain has to be the Joker. Like sometimes you want the Penguin, or actually the Penguins, whatever. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just want to beat gang members, you know? You don't want to,
yeah.
It's not always big boss. It's not Dark Souls, you know?
That's right. And I would argue that actually part of experiencing and learning how to gauge challenge rating is to have those easy fights. Because then, in addition to that, you learn what your players do. Because there's other things you can do outside of challenge rating that you can hinder your players or excite them in a way or challenge them that aren't inherently based on the numbers in the book. Like if one player has a very specific strategy, and you know that they like to use that strategy, can you try to give them either an avenue to empower them to keep doing that, or do you give them something where they have to make a choice that they wouldn't otherwise make? Without, of course, disabling them altogether, but perhaps prompting them to try something different. Obviously, within the context of your group, as you learn through a series of fights that you possibly give them, right?
Mm-hmm. It's also about like looking at your players' advantages and disadvantages, because like if you got a party that's like if any of them have like disadvantage against like psychic or necrotic or something like that, like something that's not swing a sword at it and it goes away, then it's like about it's about how they fight, not how they as players play, but also how their characters engage with a monster. So you might want to down level certain monsters or choose something that's a little easier if it's a certain kind of combat that they'll be engaging in.
Mm-hmm. Like today, I was actually helping somebody on Twitter who was having a problem with a player who was using the spell Spike Growth a lot, and that's a spell where like a huge area of ground becomes difficult terrain and hurts anybody that walks into it, and also it's like non-detectable. So if somebody wanders into it, they're basically screwed. So like in a situation like that, also understanding the environment and the types of things that enemies can do can help your combats or make them more difficult as well. So my suggestion in that situation was use flying enemies. They won't touch the ground, or give your enemies like ranged weaponry so they don't have to enter these areas. Give them cover. Give them magic items that allow them to fly. But the downside is then the players can loot those items if they win.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the more enemies you throw in, the more difficult the challenge becomes. I can't think of the exact moment I realized how to gauge challenge rating, because I think it's a constant struggle that isn't exactly the best. But yeah, I'd say like at most use 2 monsters per player, and if the CR matches the players the group of players levels, that's probably a good solo monster.
I'd agree with that. Not that I've ever DM'd before, but I'll agree with it.
You'll just have to take my word on it. Oh,
that's right.
So,
that's what this whole night has been about.
Oh yeah, exactly. Thank you, Edmund Clark, for sending in this question. To anybody else listening out there, if you want to submit a question to Question Dicely, send an email with your question to dicelychannel@gmail.com. Include the letters QD in your subject, and don't forget to leave a social media handle so I can give you a shout out. I'd like to thank my guests for coming on the show with me, and this was so much fun answering your questions, Jonnathan.
Thank you for taking the time. I wish I had written them down in a way that made them easier to understand. But it's huge. Like, it's been a huge help, and I really appreciate you having me on. It was great to catch up with the both of you. I'm realizing now that it's how long it's been, and it makes me feel bad thinking I haven't reached out before this. But I hope you're both well, and that. Yeah, like just working in theater it's not great right now, I know, for a lot of people, and I hope you guys are both doing well.
Likewise to you as well. It's it was great hearing from you, and this was a pleasant opportunity to catch up. And Jason, I see you all the time.
That's right. We're really just glad to be here. I mean anybody's company is good company at these days. Like, of course, the pleasure is truly all mine.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do this in person when we can and when it's safe. But I also like that we're I know I don't know if I'm supposed to break the fourth wall here, but that we're like this is going to come out on January 1st, I think you said. Yeah. So I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone, first of all.
True.
But also, like, I'm interested to see what like 3 weeks from now is like. Who knows? Maybe COVID just magically goes away. And then we can. So yeah, let's start making 2021 plans. No, I'm kidding. Let's wait until it's safe.
That's right. Yeah, there will certainly be a feeling of relief knowing that there is a new year happening in the future based on the events of this year, to be sure. And certainly, I hope that everyone in the world is looking for the optimism over the course of the holidays and checking in, taking care, and doing what you got to do to keep it going into 2021.
I'm super excited to play D&D in person for the first time because I have not done that.
Yeah, that's got to be such an odd feeling. Like it was such a interesting challenge to begin playing online when I'd only ever played in person, but this is normal now.
It's great. It's going to be weird trying to DM and then like losing the ability to turn my camera off or turn it on or unmute myself. I'm gonna miss. I haven't even gotten to it yet, and I know I'm gonna miss that power. I feel like it's something that you don't get when everyone's like all eyes are on you physically, and it's like, oh, shit, here we are. All right, gotta make something up.
There is an oddly satisfying feeling of like I can kind of disengage if I need to and not really disturb anybody too much. But something I really miss about being at the table. And thankfully, the groups I play with are all quite skilled. And so, like, I would just, the one thing I miss about being at the table directly is like just as a DM, just getting to kind of sit back as my players start role playing and just to look at them, actually look at them as they role play and just be like, damn, these guys are so good at this. Just like,
yeah,
just feeling the chemistry of the game. It just, that's what I miss.
Yeah, like the actual human interaction of it and the energy in the room.
Yeah. But in the meantime, we'll put on a show.
In the meantime.
That's right.
Well, if you guys ever want to play a one shot sometime, I'm totally down. Or even just get a campaign going. I don't know how much more time my of D&D I can handle, but I'm willing to let it ride. We'll see.
That's right. Yeah, you got to see what the future holds, right? It's like the second you have less economic responsibility, it becomes D&D responsibility. You got to schedule as many games in as possible.
Exactly.
That's right.
Do you guys have any social media you'd like to plug?
I don't remember my Instagram, but I haven't posted in months, so don't follow me on Instagram. No, I don't think I have. I'm on Facebook. If you want to be friends, we can be friends. I like friends. Yeah, no, I don't think I'm on social media.
That's fair.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not big on promoting myself through social media at all. But I would strongly suggest that you check out all of what Dicely has to offer, as well as some of our friends who are streaming on Twitch right now. Logan, who was previously here as LCKraken, as well as other guests that I'm sure Denny has introduced. If they're playing Among Us, I am frequently trying to kill them as the imposter.
Oh, God, it's so true. Well, I told Logan I would promote his social media, so you can follow Logan on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at the username LCKraken. Yeah, like Jason's saying, he's usually streaming games throughout the week, so follow him on Twitch. I think that's one of his big outputs right now. So keep up with him there, LCKraken. And I'd like to thank my guests for joining me on the show today. It was fantastic talking to all of you. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to Speak Dicely. My name is Teni Brant, and I will speak Dicely with you again next Friday. I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Speak Dicely podcast is produced by Teni Brant. The intro and outro music were created by Salik Brant. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to the Dicely D&D YouTube channel. There you can listen to previous episodes of the Speak Dicely podcast, as well as watch our introductory series on how to play Dungeons & Dragons. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitch at Dicely DND. And you can now listen to the podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time on the Speak Dicely podcast.